The air in Istanbul was thick with the promise of rain and a distant, mournful call to prayer. On the ground floor of the Saudi Consulate, a man paced on the polished marble floor, the sound of his footsteps the only counterpoint to the quiet, administrative hum. Jamal Khashoggi checked his watch for the fourth time. 1:08 p.m. He was here for a piece of paper, a document certifying his divorce so he could begin his new life, a life built on the fragile hope of freedom. His fiancée, Cengiz, waited outside the gates, her phone ready to capture his return. She watched him disappear into the gleaming white building, a modern fortress on the edge of a city that bridged continents. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air conditioning was frigid, the lighting unnervingly bright. A man who introduced himself as Mar Mutrib greeted him. The name meant nothing to Jamal, but to intelligence services watching, it was a thunderclap. Mutrib was no consular official, he was a security officer, a known figure from the Crown Prince's inner circle. "Murdoch Jamal," Mutrib said, his voice calm to calm. "Please, come with us. We need to go to the second floor for the documents." The request was unusual. Why not a ground floor office? Why the need to go upstairs? But Jamal, a man who understood the nuances of power, perhaps felt the first cold trickle of dread. He followed. The staircase was wide, opulent, a display of state power. With each step, the world of bustling Istanbul, of hatters waiting faithfully, receded. The second-floor corridor was silent, a plush, sound-absorbing silence. It led to the study of the Consul General himself, a room meant for diplomacy and pleasantries. Mutrib opened the door and Jamal stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind him, a sound as final as a tuned ceiling. The room was no longer a study. It was a stage meticulously set for a single, brutal performance. Mutrib was there, but now his demeanor had shed its bureaucratic pretense. He stood rigid, an executioner in a business suit. Two other men were in the room, their faces grim. And then there was a third, a large man standing by a table. He was dressed in dark clothing, and he held something in his hands. As Jamal's eyes adjusted, he saw it was not a document. It was a bag, a black plastic bag. The large man moved with a predatory swiftness. Jamal's mind, the mind of a seasoned journalist that had navigated the labyrinths of Middle Eastern politics for decades, must have processed the scene in a horrifying instant. The trap. The isolation. The bag. "Stop him!" The voice was Mutrib's, sharp and commanding. The large man, later identified as a forensic pathologist named Salah al-Jubaidi, advanced. Jamal tried to retreat, his back pressing against the wood of the door. "I have a right to pray," he gasped, the words a desperate, instinctual plea for a moment's mercy, for a connection to God in the face of man's absolute evil. Mutrib's reply was cold, stripped of all humanity. "Pray? You will pray in hell." The struggle was brief, a flurry of limbs against overwhelming force. They forced him onto the table. Al-Jubaidi's movements were practiced, clinical. He placed the bag over Jamal's head. The world went dark. The plastic clung to his mouth and nose, each panicked breath sucking the film deeper. A suffocating kiss? He fought, his body convulsing, but hands like vices held him down. Then the pathologist did not wait for death by asphyxiation. He produced a bone saw. The electric whir of the motor was a grotesque sound in the consul's study, a sound that had no place in a diplomatic mission. The sound did not last long. The act was one of ultimate barbarism, a dismemberment not of a body, but of a man's voice, his dignity, his very right to exist. The silence that followed was heavier than the scream that had preceded it. The only sounds were the ragged breaths of the killers and the soft, wet noises of their work. Half a world away, in an anonymous office in Langley, Virginia, an analyst stared at a stream of intercepted communications. The NSA, with its global electronic dragnet, had captured whispers. The transcripts were fragmented, but the code names were clear. A 15-man team, a nest of spies, was on the move. The analyst pieced together flight manifests, credit card receipts, and hotel bookings. A private jet had left Riyadh for Istanbul. The passengers were not diplomats. They were a tiger team, an assassination squad. The pieces were there, a horrifying mosaic taking shape on a classified server. But intelligence is a slow beast, mired in bureaucracy and the need for certainty. By the time the dots were connected with any confidence, it was too late. The bird had already flown. The kill had already been made. Back in Istanbul, Hatis Cengiz's anxiety curdled into a cold, hard fear. An hour passed, then two. The sun began to dip below the minarets. She called friends. She called the police. The consulate gates remained shut, their opaque surfaces offering no glimpse of the horror within. Inside, the clean-up was underway. The killers worked with a macabre efficiency. The room was scrubbed, the blood washed away. Al-Jubaidi, the pathologist, had reportedly donned headphones, listening to music as he dismembered the body, separating the man from his physical form, turning him into evidence to be disposed of. The parts were placed in bags, and the bags were carried out by men wearing the same kind of casual indifference. As a janitor taking out the trash, one of the assassins, a man named Mustafa al-Modoni, had been tasked with a particularly gruesome bit of theatre. He was of a similar build to Jamal. He was sent to walk around Istanbul in Jamal's clothes. A phantom puppet meant to create a false digital trail, a ghost story for the age of surveillance. He visited the blue mosque, his movements captured on CCTV, a doppelganger sowing confusion, while the real man's remains were bundled away. Their final destination a mystery of furnace and acid bath, or perhaps a simple unmarked hole in the earth. Days later, under immense international pressure, the Saudi authorities allowed Turkish investigators into the consulate. The consul general's study had been repainted, the floors repolished. The air was heavy with the cloying scent of fresh paint and industrial cleaner, a desperate attempt to mask the metallic smell of blood. But forensic science is a stubborn truth-teller. Using a chemical reagent that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin, the investigators sprayed the surfaces, and the room began to glow. Luminol revealed what the paint could not conceal, a phantom landscape of violence. Splatter patterns on the walls, smears on the floor, a ghostly outline of where a body had lain. The consulate had become a charnel house. The denial from Riyadh was swift and brazen. It was a rogue operation, they claimed, a kidnapping gone wrong, a fistfight that escalated. The story changed, evolved, collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. But the truth had a voice, and it was recorded. Turkish intelligence, it was revealed, had bugged the consulate. They possessed the audio of the entire killing. They knew the voices, the commands, the last, desperate breaths. They leaked the transcript, a document of such chilling, clinical evil that it sent a shudder through the corridors of global power. The world listened not to the sound, but to the words on a page, and it was somehow worse, allowing every reader to imagine the screams, the whir of the saw, the final, terrible silence. In a secure room in Washington, a senior CIA analyst was given a copy of the transcript. He read it, then read it again. He compared the names and voices to the intelligence they had gathered. The conclusion was inescapable. The operation was too sophisticated, the participants too close to the seat of power. The phone of the Crown Prince's close advisor, Saud al-Qahtani, had been in contact with the leader of the hit team, Mar Motrib, just before and just after the killing. The Crown Prince would not have launched an operation of this magnitude without the consent of MBS, the analyst would later tell his superiors, using the acronym for Mohammed bin Salman. It was not a rogue operation. It was a direct order. A state had executed a journalist for the crime of speaking his mind. The intelligence was presented to the president in a classified briefing. The response was a muted, geopolitical calculation. Arms deal spoil. A strategic alliance against Iran. The moral outrage of the world was weighed against realpolitik, and it was found wanting. There would be no real accountability. The final image is not of a grave, for there is none. It is of a bench in a park in Istanbul, where Hatis Cengiz sometimes sits, staring at the empty space where the consulate stands. It is of a bone saw, cleaned and stored in an evidence locker, its purpose fulfilled. It is of a digital ghost, Jamal Khashoggi's last tweet, still visible, a testament to the hope that was extinguished in that soundproofed room. The killing was meant to silence a critic, to send a message that no one was beyond the reach of the prince's wrath. But in the end, it did the opposite. It amplified his voice, turning a man into a symbol. The consulate doors closed, the paint dried, the official lies were repeated. But the echo of that final, desperate prayer would not fade. It lingered in the air, a permanent stain on the conscience of the world, a whisper from the other side of a door that must never be closed again. For in the end, the most terrifying thing was not the monster in the dark, but the monster that arrived in a government limousine in a suit and tie, carrying a diplomatic passport and a bone saw.